This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, another Happy New Yoe with Craig Yoe. Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, and on this episode, I have the pleasure of talking with Craig Yoe for our annual Happy New Yoe episode. But before we get to that conversation, I want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts will be from anywhere between 20 to 35% off the cover price, and every single month you're going to find incredible specials that go from 45 and 50% off cover price, but sometimes you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that. This is the 1st of January, so DCB Service has not yet put up its January specials, but you can always count on great discounts, and one of the things that we particularly like on the Comics Alternative, bundles. It's a great way of getting a lot of comics at very good prices, and you can usually find great varieties of bundles from such publishers as DC, Marvel, and Valiant. You can't go wrong with the guys at dcbservice.com. You gotta go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your books there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. For the past several years, we've had Craig Yoe on for our very first episode of a new year, something that we call the Happy New Yoe episode, and this year is no different. This time around, I talked with Craig about a variety of things, and basically our conversation is broken up into three parts. We start off by discussing 2017, the year in review when it comes to Yoe Books. So I talk with Craig about the various publications that he put out this past year, and some really good insights there. Then we field a series of questions that people asked on Facebook, things that people wanted me to ask Craig Yoe. And there are some interesting questions there. And then that leads us into what we can look forward to in 2018. And Craig goes into quite a bit of detail of the various books that he has coming out, not only from Yoe Books, but even works that he has coming out from other publishers such as Dark Horse and Little Simon, which I think is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. So you'll be surprised at some of the things that he has lined up in the coming year. We have a great conversation, and I'd like for you to listen to that right now.
We love all the stuff from your books, and we look for the upcoming titles. They don't cost a whole lot of dough. That's why we say yippee-yi-yo. You too can buy all of your books. Be a fan, and there's one way to show.
I'm pleased to have back on the Comics Alternative the perennial favorite, Craig Yoe, and as we have been doing for the past several years, an interview with Craig is the very first episode of the Comics Alternative for the new year, something we like to call the Happy New Yoe Show. Craig, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm just the cleverness of Happy New Yoe. It's gone on for many years. It just doesn't fade, does it?
That's right. And actually, you came up with the slogan Happy New Yoe.
Oh, I did. Okay.
Yeah, I think at some point during one of our interviews we were doing for the new year, you said this is a Happy New Yoe show.
Well, then it's probably not that clever because I've never really come up with anything original in my life. I probably stole it. It's probably a riff on Happy New Year.
Okay, so, this is going up the very first day of January, so I guess we are officially coming out of the holiday season. How's the holiday been for you and Clizia?
We got pretty young kids, and so, that makes the holidays, they still believe in Santa, or at least pretend to, so that not to jinx the presents under the tree. So it's a lot of fun, and their faces light up, and they get cookie sugar highs, and we get high off their highs, contact highs from their cookie sugar highs. So it's all a joyous kind of occasion. We love it.
That's good. Yeah, I'm glad you guys had a great holiday, and with the little kids, you can experience vicariously their joy. My kids are grown now, so that kind of enthusiasm, it's gone.
Yeah, well, you got to wait till they get even older and bring you some little grandchildren. It'll eventually happen.
Yeah. Okay, so Craig, one of the things I'd like to do on this show is I definitely want to talk with you about your upcoming books for 2018. But before we do that, maybe we can take a look back at some of the titles that came out in 2017, because there are a lot of Yoe books that were released. And, some of which I've talked with you about either for the podcast or like maybe say one of your other editors like Mitch Maglio. I talked with him on an interview show. But, I've also talked with you about some of these books just one-on-one, like when we've met at Heroes Con. I know that I guess your most recent release for Yoe Books came out in December, and that is Mummies, Classic Monsters of Pre-Code Horror Comics.
Right. Yeah, Mummies was a fun book to do. Originally, we thought of we heard the Universal monsters were coming out, with the Mummy and Frankenstein and Wolfman and all those, and the Creature and all those guys over again. So we go like, well, there's monster equivalents of those guys. Why don't we do some books related to that? And so our scheduling didn't really work out. But we brought them. I think our Mummies book came out a couple of months out after the Mummy movie came out, so the Mummy book was fun to put together, though, and we there's a lot of great Mummy stories in the old pre-code 50s horror comics, and like the old comics, there's similarities in each story, but the writers are always trying to come up with a new angle, a new wrinkle, and so each story kind of stands on its own as being wacky and weird and fun. And this is really a lot of fun to see the Mummies. I think one of my first comic books when I was a kid was an Adele comic book adaptation of the Mummy movie, and I just remember this opening splash page to this day. The Mummy lurching towards you with one hand raised, about to grab your throat or something like that, and that always had a big impression on me when I was a young teen. And so it was fun to, so much of what I do is kind of capturing stuff from my youth. And so it was kind of fun to do a Mummy comic book that will maybe scare new generations. Some of those 50s stories, they're always funky, and they're always, many of them are a little bit wacky, but some of them are really quite scary, especially if you're a young kid. Those artists and writers really knew how to put it over as far as making things scary and gory and a little creepy and eerie.
Well, one thing I noticed, Craig, is that with this book, Mummies, Classic Monsters of Pre-Code Horror Comics, it doesn't seem to be part of the Chilling Archives of Horror series that you have. And is that the case?
Absolutely. We've been wanting to try some new formats, and we thought this one would be a good one to have a less expensive and more affordable, in other words, and more impulse kind of thing. So as a paperback, it's the cost came down. And it's a little smaller size than our normal books as far as dimensions. And I'm really quite pleased with the format. I think we're going to use it for some other things. We predicted and knew this would happen. A couple of people grumbled that it wasn't part of our normal series of Chilling Archives of Horror Comics, our hardback, little larger hardback series. And there's the collector who likes to line all those up on the shelf, and they're all the same size and everything like that. So some of those folks were less than pleased, but I just got a sales report that the book did really well, and a lot of people did like the format, and we've got some upcoming projects we're going to try that in. It's actual like old time comic book dimensions, and so it's neatly in your long box if you don't want to have it on a bookshelf, and it's just a very friendly format. I think good for reading in bed, and which is always good for horror comic books. Reading them in bed with a flashlight under the covers, that's important. So this size and is a little easier to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed when I got my copy of Mummies, a couple things. One, it was paperback, which I'm not used to when it comes to Yoe Books, and also the smaller dimension. And I like this. I wondered. That's why I wanted to ask you why the change. But I think the sales angle is important, and if this is a way for maybe to get more, let's say, impulse buying, as you mentioned, or for people, just making this more affordable to readers. Now, don't get me wrong. I love, and I've told you this before, I love the hardbound volumes that you put out. You guys do great production. The larger format, the hardback, it's just wonderful to have. And you're right. There is something to be said for, having all of these volumes on your bookshelf lined up really neatly. But, I think it's a good idea to try something new with this Mummies volume, a smaller package, paperback, and you think you're going to do more of this, huh?
Absolutely. I think it just feels so friendly, and I think we'll try it on some other things. Again, not for everything. Some things should have a hardcover, but we're doing when I talk about upcoming books, I'll talk about a couple of things that we're already putting in that format.
Okay.
Future. We're definitely going to do some more. Sometimes as a creative person, even I get just tired of the same size and shape books. So we're going to do some smaller books, some paperback books, some square books, and some round books, whatever. We're going to kind of mix it up in these years. And the Mummies was one of our first forays into that, and I was pleased with the results and how it feels. And we may have lost a couple disgruntled collector types that would have preferred it to be part of our ongoing Chilling Archives of Horror Comics series, but we seem to have gained quite a number of readers for that volume. So I deem it a success.
Great. Now, a book that came out the second half of 2017 that is a part of your Chilling Archives of Horror series is the Complete Voodoo Volume 3, and that came out in September. So this is the third Complete Voodoo volume. How many can we expect?
Well, there's 3 volumes to Voodoo, as you just mentioned, and that collects all the issues of the old Voodoo comic book. So that's it.
So the third one is completes the Complete Voodoo run.
Yeah, and since we're on the subject of horror comics, I want to mention just a few of the guys that help us. But Steve Baines is the one that did put together the Mummies collection for us, and he does his blog, The Horrors of It All, which is for many years now, which digitally offers people free comic book stories, but he's a main part of our horror reprint series, and so he put together the Mummies book. So not only I pushed for that format, but he did his usual brilliant job of and great that have great artwork and snappy endings and all that good stuff. So a lot of praise for the success of that, which I'm deeming successful.
Mm-hmm.
I should mention who made that success happen, and a big part of that was Steve Baines. Now, the Voodoo, we've had a couple people help us. Michael, Voodoo was published by a fascinating publisher. It was the old Iger shop, which kind of modeled themselves on trying to look like Matt Baker, who was a brilliant draftsman. They had guys that were, I mean, who is the equal of Matt Baker? Maybe none of them were exactly the equal of Matt Baker, but they tried their best to have his great good girl artwork, which he was famous for. And so a lot of these monsters meet up with beautiful, shapely women in the Voodoo series, which was published by Superior Comics in Canada. And they were an interesting publisher because they were printed cheaper than even the usual comic book. So the reproduction's pretty bad. So we have to spend a lot of time restoring those comics and trying to make them readable and stuff like that. But the artwork does have a grit and flair and gusto that, unlike any American comics, I think that crossing the border made them, the Iger shop kind of realized they could do something a little different to try to outgross and out weird anything else that was done in the American comics. And the stories written by a woman, Ruth Rosh, who's one of the female heroes of the comics and deserves much more exposure and acclaim. She probably edited and wrote most of the stories, and they're really bizarre. They're really wacky. I mean, they're just some of the nuttiest stories in all of comics, and I don't know what inspired her nuttiness or zaniness, but you can see that there's vegetables that come to life and just all kinds of wacky little guys that get miniaturized and go around hitting people with hammers and just all kinds of bizarro kind of twists and sick kind of stuff, and a lot of them are pretty gory, and in places they get kind of pretty surreal or almost nonsensical, and we love those Voodoo stories. And so I think it's one of the greatest titles of the golden age of comics and in the horror period especially. And so this was another experiment. Usually we curate collections where we around a theme like Mummies or some of our horror reprints in the Chilling Archives of Horror Comics are centered around an artist. But this was the first time we decided to reprint a whole title, every single issue and story. And so there was enough to do 3 volumes of Voodoo, but I think it was definitely worthy because the stories are so incredibly great. So yeah. It was another experiment. We're kind of, we're 5 years old now. This last year was our 50th anniversary of Yoe Books, and it was my 50th anniversary of doing publications related to comics. When I was a teenager 50 years ago in my parents' basement in Akron, Ohio, I cranked an old mimeograph machine I bought from a church that was getting rid of it, and put out unholy comic book historical fanzines, So that mimeograph went from good to evil, and so I put out a fanzine 50 years ago called Yoe Syrian, and my first issue was an article about Magazine Enterprise Comics, which was another publisher of the 50s. So everybody else was doing fanzines about Marvel and DC fanzines and stuff. But I was right from the start interested in the history of comics, and so that's what I was cranking out. So that was 50 years ago. So we had a great year this last year, celebrating 50th anniversary of me being involved in comics fan publishing, and 5 years of Yoe Books with IDW, so it was great. But we were kind of mixing up the formats, doing some different things, and trying some new stuff, and we'll be doing more of that as I begin my next 50 years.
Yeah.
So,
now, you mentioned that, you were doing something a little different in these 3 volumes of the Complete Voodoo series, where you're focusing on just one publisher. I think something somewhat like that, but not, the complete run of the title, is another book that came out this past year, or 2017, and that is the one that Mitch Maglio edited, Fiction House: From Pulps to Panels, From Jungles to Space.
yes. Let me backtrack one more second, though, to finish up. I think I was that Steve Bain's certainly part of our horror lines, but Voodoo, the intro to the first volume was Michael Price, and then Michael Howlett took over from that, and both are good friends. And Michael Howlett did a book on Erie Publications for us, collecting some of the best stories from the schlocky.
That's right. We had him on the show.
Yeah, from the schlocky horror publisher. And before that, he did a whole history book just on Erie pubs.
Mm-hmm. He also did the Snakes book, right?
Yes, he was the editor of the Snake book. So he's very involved. So that they those guys need to get credit for Voodoo. And they put their voodoo on those books. So that's why they're so good. And yes, and then I hooked up with Mitch. Our mutual friend Roy Thomas put us together, and Mitch has an incredible passion for Fiction House, and I had always thought about doing books about publishers, and Fiction House was certainly one of the ones that I would have wanted to tackle first, and I was going to try to do it myself, but who knows when I would have gotten to it, and I certainly wouldn't have done as good a job as Mitch did, because he has such a thing for Fiction House, and he did such great research, and he enlisted the aid of other people like Trina Robbins and David Sanders, and he got Roy Thomas and Hames Wares to write introductions and forwards, and so we put together a whole book on Fiction House, and that's been very well received, because Fiction House has the big history of the company has never been covered in it. As it turns out, it was quite a fascinating history because of the people behind it, the publisher and the editors, and the publisher himself was a kind of a crazy guy who went over Niagara Falls, and
that's right,
real daredevil. And then it's interesting because of our times, and it should be interesting because they also hired a lot of women editors and artists and writers, and so we have a whole section on the women of Fiction House, and so it's interesting because on one hand, Fiction House is thought of under the term of good girl art, meaning a term amongst comics collectors and aficionados that the artists were drawing really sexy women. So on one hand, Fiction House is totally known for that on their science fiction and their covers and their jungle covers, and even their war covers, where the Rangers and Wings comics, which was about airplanes and stuff like that. Even that would have sexy women strapped to the wing of a plane, as they're dodging bullets from Nazis or something like that, Mm-hmm. So there was always this sexy component. At the same time, a lot of the people behind the stories were themselves women, and strong women, and some of them actually quite beautiful. I have to say, like Lily Renee, who's still living. Fran Hopper was still living just as the book was published, but she died a few weeks ago, and so we're sorry to lose her. So so you have these strong, beautiful women in the comics, and you have these strong, smart, talented women behind the comics. And so it's an interesting history, Fiction House, but it's a thick book, as you've seen.
Right.
And they had 6 main titles, and we for each one of their titles, covering jungle and war and just everything. We have a big sampling from each one of those titles, and a lot of original artwork from those titles. And people have been very pleased about the original art. And then we actually have a whole section in the back of just unpublished Fiction House covers that were in pencil form that were submitted to the publisher. And those are beautiful. And the artist who drew them also would draw the women sometimes half naked, to amuse the editors, knowing that eventually, when he did the finished inking, that he, had to put clothes on the protagonists. But it's fun to see these kind of inter-office jokes, if you may, to keep things lively and fun as they're approving cover artwork concepts.
Yeah. Now, you hooked me up with Mitch Maglio over the past year. And so I had him on the podcast, and we talked about this book, Fiction House, From Pulps to Panels, From Jungles to Space. And one of the things that we discussed was something that you brought up is I guess in some ways you can look at this kind of like the irony, because many of the Fiction House titles, as you mentioned, are known for good girl art, right?
Right.
Where one could argue that there's the objectification of the female body. On the other hand, as Mitch pointed out in the book and in our interview, much of the work that was done, both the writing and the art with Fiction House titles, were by women writers and artists. And in fact, there's a whole section toward the beginning, like a mini history of the women artists and writers behind Fiction House. And so he does, he talks about some of the men as well, but not near as much as he does the female creators. And so I thought that was an interesting mix.
Well, a lot of the male creators, and there were great ones that associated with Fiction House. Maurice Whitman, a real standout, and Joe Doolin, who did that special section in the back of unpublished covers.
Matt Baker.
And Matt Baker. Their lives and their careers have well been covered, but there's still a lot of work in covering the golden age female creators, and so this book gave us the opportunity to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. It's a point well taken that in some sense the women are objectified in the artwork, or both on the covers and inside. But on the other hand, if you want to or need to get past the beauty of those women, many of these there was great, strong female characters within Fiction House. You have Sheena, Queen of the Jungles, and Senorita Rio, which is a strong Hispanic woman, and you have all these like Camilla and all these and there's in the Planet stories. There's Gail Allen, and you just have all these like really strong female characters, far more than any other publisher was doing. In some sense, as strong as and great as she was, Wonder Woman in DC Comics was kind of a token figure. And in fact, when she joined the Justice Society of America, they immediately appointed her the secretary, and Sheena is kicking lions' butts and in the jungle, and Gail Allen is kicking Martian butts in Planet comics, and you got these really, really, yes, beautiful, but certainly strong female leads in many of the Fiction House stories, and again, it's many of the art and writing and editing behind it is by women, so it's a pretty cool feminist statement, somewhat hidden in under the some of the pinup B covers, but behind them there's some great stories that feature brilliantly strong, kick-ass women.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other chilling archive of horror titles that you came out with in 2017. Back in February, you released the collection. I think it was a 3-issue series, Haunted Love.
Oh, yes, Haunted Love. That was really fun.
Where you were combining what you're doing in haunted horror and in weird love, and you're bringing those together. It's kind of a mashup. Right.
Well, we do these regular comic books that are then collected into hard back collections of weird love and haunted horror. So we just thought, like, well, let's just take those two names since they're popular and have an unholy marriage of the two. And so that's how we came up with Haunted Love, just taking the names of those two titles and putting them together.
Yeah.
And so many horror stories do have a love component to it, and whether it's two lovers who end up having a revenge thing against each other, or two people that come together to fight, unify and fight some kind of monster or spook or horrid thing that's after them, and so there's a lot of love stories amongst the 1950s horror comics, and as popular and now renowned and acclaimed the horror comics of the 50s, there was also a lot of romance comics. Now for Haunted Love, we don't reprint the romance comics like we do in our Weird Love series. We just concentrate on the horror comics that had a love component, but those were two like huge genres. Superheroes, after the Nazis were defeated, comics' best villain isn't Doctor Doom or the Red Skull, but was Hitler, and probably sold the most comic books in the mid-50s. But after the war, people were less interested in the superheroes, and so the industry was floundering a bit, trying to find new genres to really exploit. And there had always been funny animals alongside the superheroes, and Donald Duck, of course, famously, and there had been other genres that were explored. But in the 50s, the romance and the horror really took off, and many of the same publishers, of course, but many of the same artists and writers that were working on the horror comics, and many of those guys were brilliant, were also doing romance comics too. So you have the same guys in the field doing it. But on this one, on Haunted Love, we concentrate on the horror stories picked from horror publishers and horror titles that had a big, strong love component. So you have guys marrying women who turn out to be zombies, and vice versa, and they're really a lot of fun. So that was a fun title to do. And again, Steve Baines did the yeoman work, not the Yoe work on that. He did on that, assembling all the different stories, and that's one of my favorite books we've done, published. Steve's Haunted Love, fun book.
Well, another chilling horror book that you came out with this past year was, what was it, the 5th volume of Haunted Horror, The Screaming Skulls, and much more?
Yes.
And that came out in March. And, that book is curious because of the person who wrote the introduction.
Okay. Who was that? Derek, that wrote the introduction? I'm confused. We've done so many books. We've done probably 100 in the last 5 years. I figured.
I did. You forgot?
Oh, you did that one.
Yeah.
Because we've had a couple of interesting writers, people do introductions in the last few years. None as interesting or fun as you, and you actually got to become a horror host. Just like the EC had their horror hosts that introduced the EC comics, the Old Witch, etc. Mm-hmm. For when we have people do introductions to our horror collections, we make them horror hosts, and we have great artists create great characters around the personalities who are doing the book. So you got that treatment. And
I got it twice because you had two people do illustrations of me as Dare Eek.
Yes. Well, people thought, like, gee, there was these artists that were fighting over the opportunity to picture you as a horror host, because I think they saw that you linked yourself so well. It was going to be such an easy gig because you so easily can be perceived as a horror. So they wanted that gig. So rather than have them fight it out and it get ugly, we gave two guys the opportunity to make you really ugly as a horror host.
Yeah, it probably didn't take much.
It really didn't. But you look good, and you wrote a great intro for which we thank you profusely.
Thank you for asking me to do it.
Well, it was our great pleasure, Dare Eek.
Yeah. Now, we were mentioning love stories in your series Weird Love. In 2017, you came out with actually 2 collections of Weird Love. In January, you released Weird Love Jailbird Romance, and then in September, Weird Love Unlucky in Love. So your Weird Love series is still going strong?
Yeah, it's still going strong. I think that's something we're going to mix up for the new year and start maybe doing we've tried a few themed issues, and recently we had a Weird Love comic book come out that's all carny girls, and
that's great.
So that was a lot of fun. Then we did a Hot for Teacher issue, and I think which was pretty racy, and so I think we're going to explore more. Gathering collections of different themes of romance comics and weird love comics, and so we're going to be kind of looking at Weird Love, and it's been very successful. We're going to try to see how we can, try some new things with it over the next year or two, and so we're looking forward to that. We got some ideas brewing, and. I think before, when you've asked me about Weird Love, either at Heroes Con or on a podcast, I always say it's my favorite project that we work on, and it definitely is. Those romance comic books of the 50s have not probably the last genre that hasn't been really explored and documented, and no one knows what's in all those old comics. So we've been having a lot of fun unearthing them and digging into them and finding these. For Weird Love, these bizarre, wacky, totally nutsoid, batshit crazy stories that the artists and writers did when they got bored with it. Just boy meets girl, boy and girl have some kind of problem, but boy and girl get back together and get married stories. Mm-hmm. When they started doing, I Fell for a Commie and Jailbird Romance and Unlucky in Love, where this woman, every guy she meets has some kind of horrible accident and dies, and just some of these bizarre stories. We've really had fun finding and collecting and putting them together, and that's comic books. As we know, the old style comic books, in comics fandom was primarily a guy kind of thing. Thankfully, with graphic novels and manga and things like that, there's as many or more women that are comic readers now. But some of the old kind of comics that we reprint still it's kind of a guy thing. But the Weird Love story, I mean, we definitely have as many women readers as men readers. And when I'm at Heroes Con or other conventions, a lot of couples come up to me and say that's their favorite reading material on their nightstand when they go to bed together. So Weird Love has been a big hit for guys and girls, and we really enjoy. Me as a guy and Clizia as a girl, I've really enjoyed putting those together.
Yeah, I remember when your first issue of Weird Love came out, Andy and I had you on the podcast, and one of the things we discussed about that first issue was there was one story that dealt with where a newly married husband spanks his wife, and so we talked about spanking, and then when that episode went up, somehow word got out that there was a discussion of spanking, and I remember on Twitter, official spanking communities, aficionados and those who appreciate the art of spanking retweeted our tweet.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we got a heads up from the spanking community.
That's beautiful. That's well, we've got some other brand new spanking books, though. Maybe we'll. One of the first books I did in this modern era, as opposed to the publishing I was doing 50 years ago, was Secret Identity, the fetish art of Superman's co-creator Joe Shuster. And
that's right.
It is what the title and the subtitle explain. It's Joe Shuster, the artist who was the artist creator of Superman. In the 50s, started doing these fetish kind of drawings for a series of books called Nights of Horror. When I put that book out, it got a lot of interest and acclaim, but spanking communities were contacting me to have me come speak at their spanking events. So that's when I first got connected with those people, and there was one event I recall where I was requested to drop trow, and they would spank me with the Secret Identity book, and so there you go. I'll leave it up to you and your listeners' imagination whether I kindly submitted to the fans' requests.
Oh, Craig, I'm on board for anything that Yoe Books puts out, but I have to say that my favorite Yoe book of 2017 has to be the one that you did with Gur Appledorn, Behaving Madly, Zany, Loco, Cockeyed, Rip-Off Satire Magazines. One, because I'm a big fan of Mad Magazine. Two, because I'm fascinated by the spin-offs or the other magazines that were inspired or like ripped off what Mad was doing. And then third, because I had such a good time talking with Gur Appledorn, and that that's another creator that you hooked me up with. And we had a really good interview about that book.
It's interesting that you say that, because I know you had a good time with them, and I enjoyed listening to the podcast, and it brought that book brought me and Gur close together as friends. And when I first started this publishing thing 5 years ago, I thought this is going to be a great way to create nice relationships and make friends. And I've become friends with you and Andy, and been at conventions and like at HorrorsCon, and made a lot of great friends. And some of the books I've done with people like with Steve and Mike, different people through the experiences made me and Mitch have made me really good friends with these folks. And Gur and I had such fun working on the book together. And he's of course in the other side of the pond, but we would get together on Skype, and he might be sitting in bed, or I might be still going to bed, and I might be sitting in bed, still in bed, but we would get together and work on Behaving Madly, and we had such a good time. And I think when you have a good time like that and a good relationship, the book itself picks up some of that fun and camaraderie, and it translates into the pages and stuff. So that certainly was a fun book to work on, and certainly dealing with fun, never before reprinted material was a lot of fun, and Gur did a fantastic job researching all that. He found every single magazine that was a ripoff of Mad, and many of them were hard to find because they were by very small publishers. And as you saw or learned from reading the book, most of them only had 1, 2, or 3 or 4 issues, before they went kaput. In fact, kaput would be another good name for a Mad ripoff. But all these all these different Mad knockoff ripoffs, swipes were short-lived. From many of them from small publishers, and it was fascinating to track them down. But as obscure as they were, as you saw from the book, there was many of the madmen were moonlighting for these guys. So you have Jack Davis and Bill Elder and Basil Wolverton, and then down the street, Stan Lee is doing his own mad knockoff called Snafu, and so you have some of the greatest folks of comics, doing some of these mad knockoffs and attempting them. And some of the articles are certainly as brilliantly illustrated as was Mad, but some of them were actually, some of them were pretty funny, and I think Mad even was in turn inspired to adapt some of the ideas in their own pages that their knockoffs had come up with. So it was a fascinating time. I mean, here again, you have the 50s, and just like the Mad Men TV show and stuff like that. You have this kind of whole world, and you have these people trying to. Some of them were comic book publishers who were trying to recover from the, censorship and decimation of the industry, and they saw how Mad went from a 4-color small format comic book to a large format black and white, slightly more sophisticated product with a little older audience maybe, and so they were trying to capitalize on that success, because Mad magazine started off selling a couple million copies, got up to I think about 4 million copies. So obviously, people wanted to do a Me Too kind of thing, and it's fascinating to see some of their efforts. So it was a fun book. That book has sold really well. People have really loved it, and it's still selling strong. And we get a lot of great feedback about behaving madly.
Yeah.
We had to kind of work, like, we can't use the word mad exactly in the title, because the people from Warner Brothers may not appreciate that. So we eventually hit on the title Behaving Madly, and it kind of fits those knockoffs kind of really well, and it was a fun book to do. We've even got Marilyn Monroe on the cover.
Yeah.
Who's kind of in this weird world of I don't know how many of your listeners remember, but there was I think a Bufferin commercial where it would show the insides of a person's head and kind of a X-ray version. So we kind of had, there's, and shows their medicines that work. So Marilyn Monroe fits in, becomes part of that ad for the cover, and so it's kind of wacky. It's kind of neat to have Marilyn Monroe on the cover of one of our books.
Yeah. Craig, you did a lot in 2017, and I want to move on to what you're going to be doing in the coming year, so we don't have time to talk about everything that you put out in 2017. Although there is one title I want to ask you about, and this is not a Yoe book. This is published by Little Simon. I think it was at an imprint of Simon & Schuster.
Yes.
Yes, this is LOL, A Load of Laughs and Jokes for Kids. And I have not seen this book. I just saw it listed on Amazon. Tell me about this.
Well, it's, I think probably the first book I ever did, which there was only one copy, and it was just a notebook that I put together. Was when I was a kid, this guy who taught me to swim would always tell me riddles, and he suggested I write them down and make my own little book to keep them in. So I made a riddle book when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12 years old or something like that, and so that was one of the first books I did, and I always kind of remembered that and loved riddles, and I loved riddle books. My mom bought me riddle books when I was a kid, and I'd get them for Christmas, and many of them were illustrated by great comic artists. George Carlson did a couple beautiful riddle books. And so I have a good friend named John Anderson, and I don't know whether he became a good friend because of doing a book with him, like we were just talking about how you make friends doing books, or we were friends and then I did a book for him. I can't quite remember the secret origins of the John Craig team, but he had me do a whole, I think 8 or 10 or more riddle books when he was at a smaller publisher. But when he got to Simon & Schuster as the head of the children's division, he wanted me to do some more riddle books for him there. And so that was that one that you just mentioned, Loads of Laugh, is the first, and now we're any day now a second one is coming out. And riddle books are great because kids love riddles. You know, I mean, I have the perfect audience right now. My 7-year-old son loves the Laugh Out Loud LOL book that we did, and because he loves the riddles and he kind of gets them, and he's making up his own now, and he gets the pun aspect of them. And then his 4-year-old sister doesn't. It's interesting when you're 4 years old, you hear your dad and your brother doing these riddles, and so you get the rhythm of the riddles, like why did it do, and then pause, do, you know, and then there's the pun and the answer, and then the resulting laughters and giggles. So he makes up pretty good puns, but his 4-year-old sister is now making up riddles that make no sense at all. You know, like why did the apple cross the road? That would be one of hers, and the answer is because the spaceship was purple. You know, I mean, and then she giggles and laughs uncontrollably. So she gets the rhythm of riddles. But there is something wonderful about riddles for kids, and so I'm excited that I'm doing these with my friend John, and we're having fun, and we've done 2, and if they do well, there's going to be more, because I've probably in my lifetime written about with my notebook when I was a kid, and then when I was doing these 8 or 10 other books earlier with John, I must have written 3,000 or 4,000 riddles. So, as my old friend Jay Lynch, who we lost this year, once told me, there's really only 1 or 2 riddles. All the other ones are just variations on those 1 or 2. But I have done 3,000 or 4,000 variations on riddles, and so I really enjoy them.
Yeah, I find it interesting that this book, you know, LOL, A Load of Laughs and Jokes for Kids, and the one that you have coming up later this year, are, you know, they're written by the same person who also created Little Penis, Oh, the Places You'll Grow. Yeah. Well, actually, that was the second book in the Little Penis series. First one was called Little Penis, and then Little Penis, Oh, the Places You'll Grow. And I just, those are two of my, they're kind of autobiographical, but they're as you know, they're puppet books. Right. So there's actually a little penis that pokes out through the book, and you follow his adventures as you move through the book. And he on the second one, Oh, the Places You'll Grow, he does actually grow in size and stature. Never gets big. He's still a little penis, but he does grow in stature, because as you turn the page, a little bit more of him is revealed each time the thick cardboard board book page is turned. So, but we just heard from the publisher, those were immensely successful. Some of my best-selling books ever, for sure. But we just heard from my publisher, we're going to be doing Little Penis Santa Claus. That will come out next year. So there's so far a trilogy of My Little Penis books, and so if your listeners like little penises, or you can't beat the little penis books for enjoyment. Mm. Now, what I want to do now, Craig, is to ask you a series of questions from other people. One of the things you did over the weekend before we recorded this interview is you posted on your Facebook page and since you tagged me, it went on my page as well. You announced that you're going to be recording with the Comics Alternative, the 2018 Happy New Yoe show. And then you asked people, what questions should Derek ask? And a number of people responded with questions, some rather enigmatic, some a little more straightforward. So I want to ask you some of these questions. Now,
okay, great.
Now, Nicholas Prom had asked this question: how about an Eros type book, Craig?
Oh, well, Little Penis certainly is an Eros type book, but I know what he means. Eros was a division of Fantagraphics, I think that he was referring to. Where
I think it still is.
I think it's sort of in retirement, but if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be corrected. But I think the origins of that is they were having financial problems. What was it, a decade or so ago, and they came out with pornographic comic books, but not crudely drawn by like the 8-pagers that our grandparents used to giggle at behind the barn, but they were actually drawn by current comic book artists, some of them under pseudonyms to protect the guilty. But I think they made some pretty good money doing erotic comic books, and I don't know erotic comic books would be difficult to do now. Our country's so conservative now. I don't think a lot of bookstores would carry them, and there's just so many issues between the sexes right now, or with the sexes, and legitimate concerns about objectifying people, and certainly there's always going to be a place for erotica. I think there must have been erotic drawings on those back in far reaches of the caves in France. There must have been erotic drawings on the cave walls, and there'll always be a place for erotic art and erotic literature. And how erotic comic books could be done today, I'm not quite sure, and I'm not quite sure I'm the person that's going to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And I'm not sure you're going to see, other than the Little Penis Santa Claus, that might be the closest we get to erotic comic books in the near future. But there's got to be a place in the future for erotic comic. People just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Little Penis, another question is from Len Danovich, and we should mention that Len is one of the people who did a caricature of me for the Haunted Horror introduction that I wrote. Thank you, Len. And
he's a great artist and a great friend of ours, and Len is very talented. And I loved his making of you into a horror host. He did a brilliant job. Yeah.
Now he asks, will the Yoe Publishing empire be the last to hold out and stay independent from being acquired by Disney, or will they own the rights to the Little Penis pop-up books? Will we be seeing them in theaters and at the theme park soon?
Lynn's a dreamer. I mean, I doubt that my lawyer's my witness. I doubt that you'll be seeing my Little Penis in the theme parks. So I don't think that would be a good idea. And I don't think that would work. But
you could use the Little Penis book with a theme song, "It's a Small World After All."
Oh, brilliant. I like that idea. Yeah. Will Disney try to acquire us? I am not at liberty to say what negotiations might be going on at this very moment, but we do know they just bought Fox, and whether Yoe Books is on their, they're being targeted right now. I'm really not at liberty to say. No, I kid. I don't see it. If anything, Yoe Books is considering buying Disney, and I actually, when I worked at the Muppets, I worked on the Muppet theme park attraction down at Disney World. So I do really have a soft, and one of my first big books was The Art of Mickey Mouse. So I really do have a warm spot in my heart for all things Disney and Mickey Mouse, and I think they do a brilliant job, and we like taking our kids to Disney movies and stuff like that. But whether there's more Disney and Yoe getting together in the future, we'll just have to see.
Okay, another question that we have from the Facebook posting is from our friend Tom Heingens, and he asks, "What's a Nubian?"
What does Tom even mean? Tom's nuts, I think, sometimes. I don't even know what a Nubian is, but I would tell Tom GFE, which I understand in the world of the escort world, GFE means girlfriend experience, but I understand that from Urban Dictionary, that term soon the acronym GFE soon became one young guy would say to another young guy when somebody asked him a question, that he would say GFE, and he didn't mean girlfriend experience. He means Google effing exists. So that would be my response to Tom. GFE, Google freaking exists, and he should look up Nubian. I don't know what he means. I'm gonna do it myself, but I'm really not sure what Tom is saying.
Okay.
Do you know, Derek?
I have no idea, but there was a response. Someone named John Lodshaw responded to Tom, "You tracer," and I don't know what that means, but I guess that's linked to Nubian. I guess you and I are just out of the know.
I think we're not as hip and cool as Tom and John, and it's much to our shame. But
we're older fogies, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah. But we'll have to ask them what these Nubian and we'll have to ask them what this Nubian and tracer means.
Yeah. Okay, another comment on the Facebook posting is by John Ordover, and he actually makes kind of a recommendation instead of a question. He says, a double-sized collection called Slightly, irritating. And he has those all in capitalized letters and 4 exclamation marks after irritating.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I mean, we're usually not that subtle. We're usually incredibly irritating. So whether or not we could be more demure and just do a slightly irritating book, I don't know. We'll give it a shot. It's a double-sized collection of slightly irritating.
Yeah.
I have pretty weird Facebook friends. Are you noticing that?
Yeah. Well, here's another one of your Facebook friends with a question, Jim Brenneman, and he asks, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop?
Is this an answer that he knows and he's just testing us on my knowledge? Or
well, I think he probably grew up, as you and I did, with this commercial. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? And as the commercial used to say, the world may never know. And so I guess he thinks that you are so knowledgeable about a variety of things that you would know how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop.
Well, I'm going to disappoint Jim then, because I don't have a clue. I really don't have a clue.
Okay, so this other question, this is going to be the last one I read from because I want to use this as a segue for what you're going to be doing in the future. Cheryl Baker asks, what new Yoe books can we look forward to in the coming year?
What a conventional question after questions about pops and Nubians and everything, and Disney buying Yoe books. Well, Cheryl, thank you for answering that question. And it is a good segue, and we're working hard and fast on many new books. Probably the one that's about to go to press, and it's probably going to be a very big book for us, is frankly something I've again partnered with some folks on to do, and that's a book called We Spoke Out. And my partners, number one is in no particular order, but I have two partners on that. Number one is Neil Adams, certainly the famous and acclaimed, well-deservedly praised artist who's drawn Batman and Deadman and so many other great things, and he's one of the co-editors of the book. And we spoke out. The subtitle is Comic Books About the Holocaust. And so these are Batman stories and Captain America and X-Men and different famous comic characters who at different times had stories related to the Holocaust. And so our third partner on the book, our third editor, is Dr. Raphael Medoff, who's from the David Wyman Institute, which it works hard to keep the Holocaust in people's minds so that we don't forget and hopefully not repeat similar atrocities. And so Dr. Medoff is a comics fan, and he and Neil actually came up with the concept, but they had an artist and a Holocaust historian in place, but they felt they needed a comics historian and a publisher, so they came to me, and so I became the third part of the team. And this is a powerful collection, and obviously even from the title, which I believe maybe Neil came up with, or maybe it was Rafi, I'm not quite sure which one, but obviously it refers to the comic book industry being proud that there was a period in American history, like one of the few places that were still keep reminding people of the Holocaust was and reaching young people especially was comic books. And many schools weren't teaching the subject. I happened to go to a high school that did. The high school was probably about 70% Jewish in Firestone High School in Akron, Ohio. But I think most of the majority maybe of schools in the United States didn't have Holocaust studies. And so kids were finding out about it through superhero stories and war comic books, and earlier than that, and that was in the 70s and stuff. Going back to in the 50s, there were a few standout horror comics that address the subject. Obviously, some of them are a little fantastical. Jewish zombies who came back to get revenge on Nazis who had escaped detection or things like that. But it's been an interesting thing to look at, and this book has actually been in the works for about 6 years. Neil and Rafi started it, and then I became involved, and we've been working really hard on it for the last couple of years. But it's going to be a big, thick book, and we got Stan Lee to write not only an introduction but an afterword. And so it's going to be quite strong, and I think again something the comic book industry can be proud of when they see that that these stories were making such a service to young people in our culture and reminding people of the Nazi atrocities, and certainly in some ways it's a timely book because there is Nazis and neo-Nazis in the United States now, scarily enough, and so more than ever in the American culture, we need to be. We're not fighting Nazis overseas, but we're dealing with Nazis right here on our own soil. So, I think that the book will strike some responsive chords. We were just booked. There's the second year of the Jewish Comic Con that's held in New York City. They've just contacted us and excitedly asked us if we would be guests at the convention, and our book is coming out shortly before their convention. So, we're going to be attending there, and they're quite excited about the book. And so I think the book's going to be a pretty heavyweight book.
Yeah. Now, Amazon lists We Spoke Out. It's coming out in late March. Is that true? Because I know sometimes Amazon can be off.
I think that's our schedule. There's a few, there's a few wrinkles that need to be. The book is basically done. There's a few little wrinkles to work out before we actually get on press, but I think it's going to be around then. It should be around then. Yes.
Yeah, I have to say this is one that one of the ones I'm most looking forward to of Yoe Books coming out in 2018, especially because I really enjoyed the previous book you did with Raphael, Cartoonists Against the Holocaust. Now, that wasn't a Yoe book, correct? That was something that you guys just published, I guess, self-published outside of Yoe Books. But We Spoke Out is a Yoe book.
I mean, that is an interesting little book in that we just kind of in a way, it's almost not even published. We just kind of put it together, and so we had some schools that wanted to use it as a textbook, and it's political cartoons about the Holocaust.
Right. And
so it was just kind of a little effort. But what the sales team and the book buyers seem so excited about We Spoke Out, which is comic book stories, that they feel like we're talking with the team at IDW, and we're thinking that after Yoe Books and IDW bring out We Spoke Out, maybe a year later we actually bring out a more public edition of Cartoonists Against the Holocaust, the political cartoons, when we've established that we have something to say about this and can do it in a quality way, and we plan on bringing that book out for real maybe in a year or so from now.
That's good. Back in November of 2016, Gene Cannonberg and I had a roundtable discussion for the Comics Alternative devoted to political comics, and Raphael was one of the panelists. And we had a really good time talking with him, and we specifically, of course, talked about Cartoonists Against the Holocaust.
Yeah, no, he's another great guy who's become a great friend through doing a book with him. So
and someone else that you hooked me up with. I appreciate that.
Yeah. We're all.
Yeah. Well, another book that I'm really looking forward to in the coming year, and according to Amazon, this is going to be released in early March. This is your second Super Weird Heroes volume, and this one is subtitled Preposterous But True. Now, let me ask you, was this second volume of Super Weird Heroes supposed to come out in 2017, and then you delayed it, or had you always planned on putting this out in early 2018?
Well, I think I should tell you, I think We Spoke Out is on schedule. I'd say the second Super Weird Heroes book is not going to come out according to Amazon's prediction. It's going to be later on in the year. We sort of decided we should give a little more space between the first volume and the second volume. The first volume of Super Weird Heroes is still selling so well that I think we had a lot of good Christmas sales.
Because that came out a little over a year ago, right? December of 2016.
And so, I think we wanted to space it out a little bit between the first and second volume, so there's not confusion, over the same book. So that book is about 3/4 done.
Okay. Now, I know from seeing you at cons and also seeing images of you at various cons, you had a really good time publicizing the first volume of Super Weird Heroes, where to some degree you wore the garb of some of those weird heroes. So I know you really get into this. So in this second volume of Super Weird Heroes, what kind of weird heroes can we expect?
Well, in the first volume, there was a hero that was just a hand, and he was called the Hand. In the second volume, Preposterous But True, Super Weird Heroes, there's a superhero that's just an eye. He's a floating eyeball, and he's called the Eye. So that's one of the heroes. A female hero we have is Pat Parker, war nurse, and she actually kind of has a super heroic nurse's outfit that she flies around in and fights Nazis. And so there's certainly going to be the WTF question mark factor when people look at these different wacky heroes. I've actually think that the second volume is even nuttier than the first, which is always a good thing, because a book that's so successful, you don't want to disappoint people, with a subsequent volume. You want to be as good or better, and I think this one's going to be even better.
Yeah.
And Super Weird Heroes has been in our 5 years has been our best-selling book, which isn't a total surprise, because obviously superheroes are so popular in the culture right now. Mm-hmm. And these wacky ones that people have never heard of were a lot of fun, and people had good laughs over them. And we're presenting full stories, so there's a lot of great fun reading in this series. And so the second one's going to be more of the same, even better. And but you're going to have to wait and be patient just a little bit, and be super heroic and patiently watching and waiting. They also serve who watch and wait.
Yeah, someone that I've had on the Comics Alternative for an interview a couple of times is John Morris, and he's come out with a couple of books, The League of Regrettable Superheroes, which focuses on the same kind of heroes that you're looking at in these Super Weird Heroes volumes. And then I think over the past year or so, he came out with The Legion of Regrettable Supervillains. Now, the difference between your two books, I mean, you guys are focused on the same kind of weirdness and wackiness, whereas he kind of highlights and gives summaries of what these heroes and then villains are all about. What you do in the Super Weird Hero volumes is actually include complete stories that appeared in the comic books.
Yeah, I think John's books are great. I guess great minds think along the same lines. They are different books in that he very wittily and in a very fun way, talks about these heroes. And then we do that, and then we present full stories. And so it's kind of a different kind of experience. And another thing we do is, which is a thread throughout all our volumes. Speaking of superheroes, we've always felt that cartoonists are the real superheroes of comics. And so the introduction to every single hero, we uncover a lot of information about the creators behind those heroes. And so, if there's 40 or 50 wacky superheroes in this book, there's also 40 or 50 cartoonists and writers who are highlighted, and many of them, for their names are being recorded for the first time in the context of comics history, talking about them. And we have many rare and unpublished photos or self-caricatures of these guys. And so, I just kind of want to mention that you'll see through our books that we really, more than any other character, whether it's a funny animal or a superhero, we like the characters who are cartoonists, the real flesh and blood people, men and women who put these books together, and we really like to shine the spotlight on them. So I wanted to mention that's one of the things the Super Weird Heroes is doing, and there will, in second volume, there's more of those superheroes, the cartoonists who are going to be in the spotlight too. So we're very proud of that and excited about that. Yeah.
Now I'm looking at the cover of this second volume of Super Weird Heroes, where you list some of the heroes that you focus on, and I want to ask you about a couple of them. Who is Hypnox? And that is Hip-Knox.
Yeah. Well, Hypnox was just a very weird superhero. There was many magicians in comic books and comic strips at the time, but he's a guy that actually hypnotizes people, and he looks weird, and he's got this kind of weird eyeball on his chest that hypnotizes people. And
yeah, what's that thing on his head? Looks like a brain.
Yeah, a brain or a hairnet or something. Or maybe it's a hairnet that keeps the brain inside or something. I don't know. I mean, many of these guys are pretty weird looking, and he's a pretty. I mean, he defeats villains by making them get on all four and bark like dogs, and he just does wacky He's kind of a futuristic magician or something like that.
Yeah. What about?
He's a weird one.
Yeah. What about Mr. Whiskers?
Oh yeah, Mr. Whiskers is like an old guy who's a superhero
With
and
whiskers, of course.
Yeah, with whiskers. I believe I can't remember if he's one of our cross-dresser superheroes. He might actually be a woman who puts on whiskers. Wow. And then
really.
Yeah. Again, we've been focusing on other stuff, so I haven't been living day by day with these super weird heroes. But as far as I remember, Mr. Whiskers might be not gender specific.
Yeah. Okay, well, here's a team I remember reading about in one of John Morris's book, and this is Nightmare and Sleepy.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're just bizarre looking because they're a superhero dude and his young sidekick, and many of these kind of seemingly inappropriate relationships that these superheroes guys have with their young boy companions, and they're just another one of those duos. And like Batman and Robin, they sleep in the same bed, and the older hero takes his young protege out, and Child Protective Services really should get involved because they take him out and throw them, into a battalion of Nazis to fight these Nazis, and they're just a very weird thing, but they're very surreal because Nightmare and Sleepy, they just have these nocturnal adventures, and they're weird.
Yeah, Nightmare it dresses like a skeleton. It looks like.
Yeah, they're weird.
Yeah. Now
they don't get in our book, and they're definitely weird.
Yeah. Now another team, and I haven't heard of these guys, Twilight and Snoopy. And by the way, this is not the Charles Schulz Snoopy.
No, it preceded Charles Schulz's Snoopy. And Nightmare. I mean, I'm sorry, Twilight. Yeah, he kind of has a feminine long hair and goes around, and I don't know, he's just very Twilight. He's weird. He's in the Twilight zone, and it's very strange.
And is Snoopy a parrot?
Yeah, Snoopy's a parrot, not a dog in this case. Yeah. Snoopy's a parrot, and like Kangaroo Man from the first volume, many of these guys had animal or bird companions that actually talk to them. Now, it's not totally surprising that a parrot talks to him, but he's just not mimicking what Twilight says, but he's actually intelligently holding on a conversation as they fight the bad guys together. So and the kangaroo who helped Kangaroo Man, I mean, he actually talks, and so you got to be bizarre to get in these books, and we make sure people are totally bizarre.
Yeah, and then finally, I want to ask you about Tomboy.
Oh, Tomboy's interesting because Tomboy was a adolescent girl who, again, when she's not doing homework or listening to records or something, she dives into nests of gangsters armed with machine guns, and she'll bust into their hideout and with her bare fists defeat 20 thugs with machine guns. She's quite remarkable. I mean, she's not a tomboy that's just climbing trees or wearing blue jeans, but she's actually, hauling whole groups of mafia henchmen off to jail, and while dodging their bullets.
Mm. Now, another book, speaking of superheroes, another book that you have coming out in 2018 is going to be coming out, I think, in spring. And in fact, I didn't even find out about this until just this weekend. I was looking through the January previews catalog and I saw this solicited there. And this is Super Patriotic Heroes.
Yeah. Well,
tell us about that.
Sort of got the idea about, again, we like to do old stuff, but make sure it's got a modern spin on it. And unfortunately, what I say, because what kind of inspired this is I saw that people were punching Nazis, just like Captain America and the Shield used to punch Nazis on their cover of comic books. Here on the streets of America, people were discussing because people were starting to punch Nazis at demonstrations and stuff. And so I started thinking like, well, it's kind of in the public consciousness. And that way we should revisit some of the Nazi puncher superheroes of the 40s and put together a book of them. There's always an interest in World War II among book buyers, and so I thought this might be a good one. Someone once told me that people love books about war and books about cats and books about the Irish. Those were three of
the Irish.
Yeah, the Irish. Yeah, the Irish. They said those are some of the three. Those are the three of the strongest selling books. Books about war, books about cats, and books about the Irish.
Okay.
And they said the Civil War. So I often thought, like, gee, if I could come up with a book about Irish cats of the Civil War, that would maybe be a really good big bestseller, But so this isn't quite the Irish cats of the Civil War, but we are going to have guys and gals who look like American. Took their uniforms by cutting up American flags and
red, white, and blue superheroes.
Yeah, we're going to have red, white, and blue superheroes fighting Nazis, and I think patriots again have to start fighting Nazis again, and maybe this book will help.
Yeah,
inspire people to do that.
Yeah, quite a lineup that you're covering. Now you mentioned the Shield and Captain America, but you're also going to include comics featuring Miss America, the Fighting Yank, Super American, U.S. Jones, Captain Freedom, Lady Liberty, Major Victory, American Eagle, and Captain Victory, among others.
Gosh, are you going to put like the Star Spangled Banner behind the as a soundtrack behind our discussion of this? Because
we should, yeah.
It's just my heart is swelling up with patriotic pride here, just thinking about it.
Yeah.
We're going to have all this red, white, and blue extravaganza of superheroes who are defeating Nazis, and again, maybe it'll inspire good patriots in America here to do the same. Since there's a little resurgence of that kind of thinking in the world.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned war comics. Another title, at least according to Amazon, that's going to be coming out in later 2018 is The Unknown Anti-War Comics.
Yes. By some definition, there's been no known anti-war comics. I mean, obviously, EC and Harvey Kurtzman did some comics that certainly showed how grisly war can be.
Right.
And inhumane in some ways, but they seem to stop short of actually, saying war is in no way justified. But I've actually uncovered a number of comics a whole book, a book enough for a whole book of comic book stories that actually take a strong pacifist stand against no more war and wars can't be justified. And I'm an idealistic hippie from the 60s, peacenik, anti-war activist from that era, and I know it's loopy and crazy to think that we can't really have a military and bombs and armies and fighting, but that's still what I would in my hippy dippy ways would like to hold on to. And so I was thrilled to find these stories that take that stand.
And I guess you're going to include Steve Ditko stories in this as well.
Steve Ditko with Joe Gill, who was a big talented writer at Charlton. They did a number of stories during the Cold War. There was a number of stories that were anti-bomb, anti-militarism stories. In some ways, they were probably inspired because they were worried about the Russians bombing us, but they were really calling for the end of the idea of war and of building bombs and militarism. And the stories that Steve and Joe did together were science fiction kinds of stories. So, they might be stories about Martians or people from other planets coming to Earth and to find a place to settle, and to realizing, how the Earth was going to snuff itself out from atomic bombs, and that they wanted no part of it, or they tried to convince the inhabitants of Earth to stop their militaristic ways. And so these have these themes to them. Obviously, they're not just preachy stories. They're because they're by creators like Joe Gill and Steve Ditko, et cetera. They're very entertaining stories and fantastic stories, with the science fiction aspect. But they do take a strong anti-war stance. So it's going to be a cool book.
And is it true? Is Bernie Sanders doing the introduction to that?
That's not necessarily true. He's somebody we want to ask. So when we were talking to our publisher about the book, we just made a quick mock-up, like, hey, and we could ask Bernie Sanders to write an introduction.
Because that's what I see on Amazon.
Yeah, so we've got to get that taken down, because in no way, shape, or form does Bernie know about this book, and it's a little embarrassing. I'm glad you reminded me that we need to get that taken down. Somehow, inadvertently, a visualized idea got too far down the line and actually got sent to Amazon, with Bernie's name on it. So we need to sheepishly correct that. But I do. His campaign manager is a comic book shop owner. So I do have a contact with him. So I do plan on asking Bernie if he would be interested in doing that. Now, people think like, well, that's a very far stretch, the idea that somebody of that stature would do an intro to the book. But we did get John Updike wrote the introduction to my Mickey Mouse book, and Robert Crumb wrote an introduction to Clean Cartoonist Dirty Drawings, and Mohammed Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, wrote a book to a book of anti-war cartoons, political cartoons that I did. So, and in fact, we got Derek Royal to do an introduction to Haunted Horror. So we have had people of great stature and acclaim do book intros. So we will ask Bernie, or we're open to other ideas. Who would write a good introduction to a book of unknown anti-war comic books?
I think Bernie would be great for that. I hope I get him.
So we're in agreement on that.
Yeah.
So we just have to get Bernie to agree.
Yeah. Now, another book that is going to be coming out in the coming year is, I guess, officially not a Yoe book, because this is going to be coming out from Dark Horse. And this is something that I've been looking forward to, Reefer Madness.
Yeah, now that has, I believe, gone to press. So it's actually done. We finished it. It's done. I believe Dark Horse has sent it to the printer. So it's a really fun book. What can I say? It's wacky. It's as much as people through the years from when it first came out to the 60s to the present day, people enjoy that film Reefer Madness. There was also over the top, wacky, weird, nutty comic book stories about the evils of smoking the devil's lettuce. So these stories are just, and some of the artists are, Jack Kirby did one where this young teenage boy smokes, takes a puff of a reefer and grabs an axe and cuts up half the people in his little town, and so these stories are just like way over the top, and going to be whether you're stoned or straight, they're going to be a great fun read. And they're just really fun. And there's every kind of genre of comic books did Reefer Madness type stories. Back from Siegel and Schuster before Superman did Reefer Madness stories, and which we have in there. And Crime Comics obviously did Reefer Madness stories. Romance comic books did Reefer Madness stories about girls who would take a puff and then embarrass themselves and their families, the degradation they got into as a result, and there's superhero comics where the superheroes fight these nefarious dope dealers, and so they're really fun. And then there's some government comic books type and government type comic books that we show. I remember in the 60s when hippies were, getting back to my hippie days, when many hippies were smoking pot, and in high school I remember the Underground, a guy who went on to draw the Fabulous Freak Brothers, Paul Mavridis, brought a comic book to school, and he was showing it to me in the cafeteria. It was called Hooked, and all the teenagers in the Hooked comic book were yellow skinned because their skin had become so yellowed from smoking marijuana, and Paul was just giggling and laughing about this comic book and showing it to me. So that's Hooked is reprinted in the book. So we got early stories, pre-Superman stories, to 1960s government comic books about the dangers of smoking reefer and having your skin turn yellow.
So that's going to be coming out soon, you say?
Yeah, that's
Dark Horse.
That's at the printer. So we're actually planning on bringing it out on 4/20. April. Yeah.
Appropriate.
April 20th, 4/20. Some people don't know what 4/20 is. 4/20 is, I guess, stoners. It's a code among stoners in high school where they would make a little note they'd pass to their friend about reminding them of 4/20, where at 20 minutes after 4 o'clock, when school lets out, meet me in the parking lot, and we'll climb in my car and get high. Yeah. So 4/20 is now the date of 4/20. April 20th is now kind of celebrated as Stoner's Day, and so that's when the book will officially debut, and we hope to maybe even have a book signing and Colorado or some comic book shop or something and celebrate 420 and the coming out of the Reefer Madness comics.
Yeah. We were talking about your chilling archives of horror comics, and you have a number of those volumes coming out in 2018. According to Amazon, it looks like 2 haunted horror collections are going to be coming out. Haunted Horror, Nightmare of Doom, and much, much more, and then Haunted Horror, Cry from the Coffin. But another book in the Chilling Archives series looks really interesting, and because it focuses on what you were mentioning earlier, a particular creator, kind of like you did with let's say a 2017 book, Jay Disbrow's Monsters. This is Lou Cameron's Unsleeping Dead, and this is going to be coming out apparently in April as well, right?
Right. I'm glad you mentioned Jay Disbrow's Monster Invasion, because that was just named for 2017 one of the comic books of the year by Vice magazine. So,
cool.
And they appreciate the obscure and the weird stuff, and certainly one of the weirdest artists, not only in horror but also of romance and in just comics in general, was Jay Disbrow, who is another artist that we lost this year. I mean, we lost Fran Hopper and Jay Disbrow, and right after we did books about them. So I don't want to scare any of any creators that might be interested in doing a book with us. Yoe
is cursed.
I don't think it's caused by us bringing a book about them, but Jay Disbrow is certainly one of the weirdest guys. I mean, he's kind of like a Fletcher Hanks or a Basil Wolverton or one of these really weird, or Booty Rogers, one of these really weird artists. And so a lot of people really, including Vice Magazine, really dug Jay Disbrow. So glad we brought that out. And Jay was able to see it shortly before he passed on, and he was excited about it. It was pretty thrilling to him to actually have a hardback, beautiful collection of his work. So,
and in fact, if you remember, you tried to hook me up with Disbrow, and I called the number that you gave me to try to set up an interview. But by that point, his health was really going downhill, and I think it was his wife that I spoke with. She told me that he really couldn't give any more interviews, so that was rather sad.
Yeah, it was kind of sad. Yeah, there was conventions after the book came out. There was conventions that wanted to have him as a guest, but he was unable to attend. So, he was on the decline. So I was glad that, in all the books for the Chilling Archives of Horror Comics, we've never been able to interview one of the creators until we did the book on Jay Disbrow. And we had been thinking about that, doing a Disbrow book for many years, and I'm glad we finally got it together before he passed on to his reward, and he got to at least see this book. And the introduction is actually this time is an interview with Jay, and his body was declining, but his mind was really sharp, and he has fascinating stories in that interview about the people he admired and met, like Bern Hogarth and Hal Foster, and the guys he worked with, like L.B. Cole, and all the different kinds of publishers he worked with, and the comic scene and the censorship of the time. He's got a lot of interesting insight in that interview. And so I was glad we were able to capture that and let that serve as our introduction to that book, and that people are enjoying, and it's actually making best of lists. So that was a great book. Now Lou Cameron, he passed on many years ago, and so he's not in danger of a Yoe Book sending him to an early grave. But he certainly created characters that came out of the grave, zombies and things like that, and in these wonderful horror stories. But he's unique as an artist, and he was one of the first guys that really experimented with how the pages were laid out. And he was doing horror stories, so he's sort of like a Graham Ingalls or Bob Powell, a great horror artist, but he was also kind of anticipated what later on Jim Steranko was doing as far as innovative layouts and using surrealism, quoting Salvador Dali and the way he handled some of the panels and the artwork and the ways he put the comics together. And the only other guys that were of his contemporaries that were doing experimental work was like Will Eisner and Bernie Krigstein. Krigstein's most experimental story is going to be in the We Spoke Out book, the Master Race story, the EC.
Oh, wow.
So,
classic.
That's a classic story about the Holocaust and everything like that. So that'll lead off the We Spoke Out book. But so Krigstein and Eisner were certainly doing experimental stuff, but Lou Cameron was definitely more of one of the Tillman, who wrote one of the introductions for that book, Tillman Court talks about how he feels that Cameron was actually kind of anticipating pop art because the way he was coloring the panels and laying it out and the way he drew them, kind of really does a kind of a pop arty thing, and then the way he breaks down the panels, he was almost not only looking forward to pop art, but looking forward to what Stoyanko later did with his brilliantly innovative panels in Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and that kind of stuff. So I think people are going to really like the Lou Cameron book. He's definitely another guy that's definitely deserves a book and has been worthy and is needed to be collected. And so I think you'll really love these stories, Derek. They're really brilliantly told. He only had a few short years in comics. He went on to become a novelist and did a lot of Western cowboy kind of books. He wrote, I think, at least a couple hundred books and stuff like that. So he eventually became interested in the writing side more than the art side and abandoned the art career. But before he did these wonderfully surreal, innovative, groundbreaking, form-exploring stories, and they're horror-oriented. So it's going to be a very popular book.
Cool. Well, maybe I can get Tillman Korth to come on the Comics Alternative and talk about the Lou Cameron book when it comes out.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, Tillman's another great guy. Another friend.
Someone else you'll have to hook me up to.
Yeah, definitely. Tillman would be a great interview.
Now, in a completely different genre, also coming out in April of this year, you have another book with Mitch Maglio, Jungle Girls.
Yeah, obviously the Fiction House touched on Jungle Girls, and the Jungle Girls of that were important to the Fiction House publisher, like Sheena and Camilla. But a lot of publishers did their own Jungle Girls, and so and they're an interesting genre of these beautiful girls who wore leopard or tiger or zebra skins and swung on vines. They can easily be described as female Tarzans, but in some ways even more interesting because they're strong female characters and they throw a good punch and they look good in a animal skin bikini, and so the stories are a lot of fun.
Now another book, and this is something that I remember being solicited several months ago, and I found this curious. This is Drawing and Life Lessons from Master Cartoonists, and this is a different kind of book from what you usually do, right?
Yeah, very much different. In that it is, as the title says, it's a how to draw book from master cartoonists, and but it's even different than the normal how to draw book, which is we have that aspect of it certainly, but of how to compose a figure and how to ink and how to letter and things like that, but also what we're doing is I've been for the last 50 years. One of the first things I started collecting 50 years ago was instructional courses and books on how to draw cartoons. Wanting to be a cartoonist myself, I collected those kind of books, and there was a heyday of correspondence courses starting in the early 1900s on teaching people a trade of becoming a cartoonist. And you can make $100 a week being a cartoonist, and things like that. So incredible artists through the years were involved in these correspondence courses, which used to be a thing. You could learn how to repair a car or do home electrical work, or you could learn how to be a cartoonist. And they would send you a lesson and once a month, and you would complete it, send it back for criticism, and then they'd send you the next lesson. So there was guys, and then later on, too, there was just books about how to draw cartoons. So you had people like Winsor McKay, who drew Little Nemo, and Billy DeBeck, who drew Barney Google, and Milton Caniff, who drew Terry and the Pirates and Steve Canyon, and L.Z. Segar was involved in how to draw, who drew Popeye, was involved in teaching people how to draw cartoons. Later on, Charles Schultz was involved in a company that was his first job, was working for a company criticizing students' lessons, who would send in their drawings that month, and he would criticize their lessons and give them tips and pointers, and write back and encouraging the mail order students. And so you have all these like superstars of comics, Roy Crane and
Frank King, Jack Cole.
Yeah,
Dan
Frank King,
DiCarlo, Hal Foster. It's a who's who. Yeah,
it's a who's of the greats are going to be teaching people how to draw cartoons. But because of the times, the early 1900s on, another thing, this is an aspect of the title of the book. It's not only cartooning lessons, but life lessons. A lot of these, because of the time, they were kind of not only teaching them, again, the rudimentary mechanics of drawing cartoons, but they were being like cheerleaders and life coaches, and trying to inspire the students to, work hard and put your nose to the grindstone and don't slack off. And so, we've got sprinkled throughout the book, we've got a lot of inspirational quotes, which, people need as they're trying to, become a cartoonist and maybe feeling, the lack of ability, or, having doubts or about how good they are, or experiencing frustrations trying to get things right and good. And so, not only are we teaching people, how many heads high is the average figure, 8.5, but we're also teaching them like, fortitude and perseverance and positive thinking, to become a cartoonist.
Now, another book you have coming out in early 2018 is a little curious, and I want to ask you about this. This is the paperback edition of Archie, A Celebration of America's Favorite Teenagers. And I find it curious because the original hardcover version came out, I think, in 2011. And yeah. I don't remember you having many books that were first published as hardbound and then you publish as paperback. Is this an anomaly in Yoe Books?
Well, actually, there's been instances of that. I mean, certainly that's a publishing thing where you bring out a hardback then a paperback. And we did a Felix the Cat hardback book.
Okay.
And then we followed that up a couple of years later with a paperback version. And actually, that Archie history book, we did a large hardback version with a lot of bells and whistles as far as production. But then we did a more economical version for the science fiction book club. And that was when how we were talking earlier at the beginning of the interview about how, we tried the Mummies book in a smaller format, and I remember when we got the smaller version of the really large Archie book, Clizia, she's usually busy, doing the current books for the future. She usually doesn't look at our books after they come out, and but the Archie book in the smaller format, she that night she took it to bed and was reading it. She really found it such a friendly format, the smaller version more, and so. But all that's having said all that, we're rethinking whether or not we're going to be reissuing the Archie book, and so that's not a definite thing at this point. Okay. So.
But it also strikes me that Archie is a very popular title. I mean, I do love your haunted horror and weird love, those kind of titles. But it just strikes me that something like an Archie book, like this one, Archie, A Celebration of America's Favorite Teenager, is something that has a ready-made audience just because of the popularity of Archie.
Absolutely. And we like to do books for the hardcore fans and of obscure things that maybe aren't going to play out in the general public well, but certainly we like to reach outside the comics community and reach a broader audience, and so some of our books are going to do that. I mean, people know Archie and people know Popeye, and people know marijuana, so So you have with a book about marijuana, you have two audiences. You have people who like funky old comic books, and you have people who like to get high with weed. So it's always a good thing when you have a couple different kinds of people that might be interested in a particular book you're bringing out.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned Weird Love. You do have, in early 2018, another volume of Weird Love coming out. This is Weird Love, So This Is Love.
Yes, and that's got a pretty cool cover, pretty wild cover on that one. So
a cop's coming in to a room with a woman who's bound and gagged.
Yeah. It's pretty racy stuff.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert: she ends up marrying the cop who saves her from the thug who tied her. There's certainly a happy ending there.
Yeah.
Weird Love continues, and I mean, love is weird. It's kind of redundant to say weird love, but Weird Love will definitely be on everyone's horizon for the new year.
Yeah.
Plan to experience Weird Love.
Yeah, and then there's the one that you alluded to earlier, another Little Simon book, Knock Knock Who's There, a load of laughs and jokes for kids.
Yeah. I mean, riddle books like the first one we brought out are certainly popular with kids, but kids also love knock knock jokes. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting for that knock knock joke book. One of the things I did, I looked at all the most popular names of the last 10 years. So our potential audience, who's our 7 to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, many of them will find their own name in the book as a knock knock joke.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I figured out what the most popular names were 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, and now those kids are of the riddle reading age and can find their particular book or their particular name in this book as a knock knock joke. I think that'll give them a little bit of satisfaction and fun.
Mm. Well, I've been asking you about a variety of books that are going to be coming out in 2018. Is there anything that I've missed, anything that you want to mention that we can look forward to in the coming year that I haven't brought up yet?
Really well covered. I'm worn out just thinking about all the work we have to do that you reminded me of. So we're going to be working hard, and our New Year's resolution is to just like the cartooning masters inspired the wannabe cartoonists to get their nose to the grindstone. I'm inspired this new year. It's always great to talk to you at the first thing at the year, because I'm always inspired to press on and persevere and work hard to bring out as great as books as I know how. I would like going over this list with you. It shows me so I'm excited to hear about all the books we're going to be doing this year.
Yeah, I am too. And I thank you for taking the time and talking with me, not only about the books that came out in 2017, but what we have to look forward to in the new year from Yoe Books. Yep.
It's been fun, as always, doing the Happy New Yoe interview, and I look forward every year. It's the highlight of my year. It's the first thing of the year, and everything else after that is just kind of it
just goes downhill.
Yeah, it just goes downhill until a year later I get jazzed up again. So it's been fun doing this, and thank you for your listeners. And I'll see you hopefully at Heroes Con this summer. That great comics convention that we know and love, and dinner's on me for kindly hosting me for this interview.
Wow. It's always great having you on for the Happy New Yoe show, our very first of the year, as we've done for the past several years. But every now and again, we have you on later in the year, and I hope to have you on then as well.
Yeah, maybe we can toke up and talk about Reefer Madness, or get our picket signs and talk and rally against war, or do some of these fun things together.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Craig. Nice talking with you.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
So we say it once more to be sure that Yoe Books are the finest you can purchase. The reason they're good is no mystery. It's that Yoe Books are making comics history.
As always, it was a pleasure talking with Craig Yoe, and we had a very substantive conversation. It lasted for almost 2 hours, but we got a lot of discussion in, and time just flew talking with Craig. I want to thank him again for coming on the Comics Alternative. He is the most interviewed guest we have on the Comics Alternative, and that's not going to change anytime in the near future. I hope to talk with him at least a couple of more times before next New Year. And if you want to get great books like the kind that Craig puts out, you can't do better than going to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find great discounts, not only on all future Yoe books, but on a variety of comics, graphic novels, collections, individual comic books, and don't forget the bundles. That's dcbservice.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media. We have accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, YouTube, and Slack. You can subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But of course, you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com. Again, I want to thank Craig for a great interview. I can't think of a better way of starting 2018 than a conversation with him. I hope all of you have a great new year, and we will be back soon with more podcast episodes, interviews, reviews, and otherwise. It's going to be a great year, and I look forward to podcasting at you later.